What is poppin' YouTube? Back again with another video. Today we're doing my top 30 running back rankings and tiers to let you know who you should start, who you should sit. Ask me any sit question down below and I will get back to it. But hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. We are building the best fantasy football YouTube community from the ground up. So come join us on the ground floor. Let's go. Without further ado, we're going to be talking about my S tier. We got CMC against the Los Angeles Rams. We don't need to harp on why CMC is in the S tier. Finished as the RB2 last week, and they're playing the Los Angeles Rams where they're projected to win by more than 7. When you're up by more than 7 and you're projected to have that large of a lead total, that means you're going to be running the ball a lot. And CMC, as much as he's an amazing pass catching back, will be able to get those carries. So I like CMC as my RB1 this week, especially with Austin Ekeler potentially not playing this week. We move on to our A tier. We have Saquon Barkley, Nick Chubb, Derrick Henry, Tony Pollard, Bijan Robinson, and Austin Ekeler. Now, I know of the time of this recording. I'm recording this on Thursday night. It comes out Friday. If Austin Ekeler does not play, of course, bump down Austin Ekeler. Maybe you could have the conversation about Joshua Kelly later on. Saquon Barkley and the New York Giants are playing against the Arizona Cardinals this week, also a 7-point favorite. The thing that we have to remember is the Dallas Cowboys absolutely kicked the Giants booty hole last week. So you're saying to me, Caleb, Saquon Barkley didn't even produce this year. Why are you having him this high? For me, it's just the matchup. We saw the Arizona Cardinals absolutely get run over last week, and nothing's going to change this week with the New York Giants. I think the New York Giants get back on track, and I like Saquon as my RB2 this week. Moving on to my RB3, we have Nick Chubb against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, this is a spread that's going to be a really close game. It's always in conference games in the AFC North are always close, but Nick Chubb, we did see the volume we like to see last week, even though it was an absolute crapshoot of weather. I mean, we can't really take into account how the Bengals players played, nor the Browns. So I'm excited for Nick Chubb this week as RB3. Hopefully, maybe he can add some more receptions in this week, because that is what we've been talking about with that elite level upside. We then move to my RB4, which we have Derrick Henry versus the Los Angeles Chargers. This is not a favorable matchup for Derrick Henry, but based on the volume that we saw last week, we have to put him here. I think it's going to be a lot higher scoring a game, and so I like Derrick Henry here at my RB4. At my RB5, we have Tony Pollard. Tony Pollard is going up against the New York Jets. And now, while the Dallas Cowboys are favored by 7 points, that's mostly because Zach Wilson is starting, not because of this amazing New York Jets defense. And I'm a little bit worried about it. If we are honest with ourselves, if Tony Pollard can catch some passes, get it going on the field, I think Tony Pollard, his volume enough puts him in this top 5 RB conversation. And that's where I have him this week against the New York Jets, because if they do get up, they're going to be running the ball. And of course, you're going to be handing the ball off to Tony Pollard. We then have Bijan Robinson against the Green Bay Packers. And the thing that we have to remember about with Bijan Robinson against the Packers, the Green Bay Packers, the spread's pretty even with Bijan Robinson and the Green Bay Packers. We have to remember last week, it was the Tyler Allgeier, Bijan Robinson show. Kyle Pitts, Drake London were nowhere to be found. The passing game, nowhere to be found. But the rushing game was to be found. So we like Bijan Robinson here as RB6. We still think he has way more upside than Tyler Allgeier. And I think as we go into the next few weeks, we see the absolute volume of rushing attempts that this team has. And so I do love Bijan Robinson here as my RB6. My RB7, of course, is going to be Austin Ekeler. Is he going to play? Is he not going to play? That's the real question. Great matchup against Tennessee, but that's why I have him here as my RB7. Moving on to my RB8, we have Travis Etienne here in my B tier. Travis Etienne is going up against his Kansas City Chiefs. We know this is going to be an absolute deadly matchup. We know they're the underdog by more than 7.5 points, but the Jaguars offense looked really good. Having a high scoring game benefits the running backs, benefits the scoreboard. So we have Travis Etienne here as my RB8, leading off B tier. Moving on to RB9, we have Josh Jacobs. Josh Jacobs versus the Buffalo defense. Not great. Not a great matchup. They're a huge underdog, so they're going to have to be coming from behind. But we look at the offense this week. Davante Adams. We got Jacoby Myers out. Davante Adams is healthy. Finally got off the injury report. But without a Jacoby Myers, I'm a little bit worried. I think there's going to be enough volume for Davante Adams and Josh Jacobs to put up solid fantasy football days. But that's not going to mean that the Raiders are going to win. But I have Josh Jacobs there as my RB9. My RB10 is going to be Joe Mixon. Last week's atrocious Bengals offense, you just couldn't even see a real picture. We're still banking on Joe Mixon being a high volume play, a touchdown play, a high carry reception type player. So we're going to just continue to pump Joe Mixon up right here as RB10. Maybe next week we reevaluate that play for Joe Mixon, but we do like against the Baltimore Ravens. They are the favorite this week. We then move on to Aaron Jones, who absolutely put on an absolute show this last week. When we're looking at Aaron Jones, he was the RB1 with 24.7 fantasy points. They're going up against the Atlanta Falcons defense. It's a pretty fair matchup this week, but the thing that worries me is, of course, that hammy. We need to continue to monitor it. That's something that could spruce up during the game if he doesn't play, or maybe he's not even going to get the same amount of snaps that he did last week. Aaron Jones is my RB11. Feels low, especially after last week, but I'm just playing conservative here. We then move to Kenneth Walker as my RB12, still in the B tier, going up against Detroit. We know that both these teams like to run the ball, so this is going to be the perfect game for both of them. Who can run the ball better? And I like Kenneth Walker here as my RB12. Zach Charbonnet, I think his time will come this season, but right now it's very clearly Kenneth Walker, the third show to have. Moving on to my RB14, we have Rhamondre Stevenson versus the Miami Dolphins. It's going to be a fairly fair game. We got Bill Belichick versus the highly touted offense for Tua, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle. So they're going to have to use Rhamondre. And based on the Pats offense starting to warm up last week, I think there is enough potential for Rhamondre Stevenson to have a really solid fantasy football day. Because last week he was the RB20. We then move on to my RB15, and I think this guy's going to be a must start this week is going to be James Cook. James Cook is going off against the Las Vegas Raiders. They're going to get up early, and based on the percentages that we saw last week, James Cook was the absolute bell cow. So James Cook, I hope you drafted him. We talked about him as an underrated target in the 6th, 7th round. We almost said he might be this year's Josh Jacobs. A lot of you laughed at me saying, Caleb, there's no way James Cook could be that, but I like the potential we saw in week 1. We move on to our RB16, still in the C tier. We have Rachaad White versus the Chicago Bears. Rachaad White put up an absolute stinker with only 6 fantasy points in week 1. Going up against the Chicago Bears defense, there's enough for us to be excited about the potential volume that Rachaad White's going to get because he did get quite a bit of volume. So I have him here as my RB16. Moving on to my RB17, RB18, we got the 2 boys. We have the Detroit Lions backfield. We have David Montgomery and we have Jahmyr Gibbs. It's hard for me to really separate because at this point they're really splitting the touches. Jahmyr Gibbs got a few less touches in week 1, but was way more explosive. David Montgomery was the prodder, but he still got the 1st and 2nd down work and had the touchdown. So I think until we start to see a little bit more separation, I think both these guys are going to be viable on the week to weeks, but their upside is a little capped. Moving on to my RB19, we have Dameon Pierce versus the Indianapolis Colts. This is going to be a pretty meh game. I mean, I expect you got 2 rookie quarterbacks dueling it out. It's going to be a high level defensive battle. We just didn't get to see Dameon Pierce really emerge last week because of that Baltimore Ravens stout defense. But like we were saying in camp, we saw the 3rd down roll and only putting up 4.7 fantasy points last week. It doesn't scare me. I'm definitely sending him back out there. Same kind of way that I view Rachaad White is the same way I view Dameon Pierce this week. So we need to pump the brakes just a little bit with Dameon Pierce. I have him here as my RB19. Moving on to my RB20, we have Jamaal Williams versus the Carolina Panthers. Jamaal Williams, my guy, also didn't have a great day last week with only 5.2 fantasy points. The Saints offense really, I mean, the receivers really got it going, but the running backs really didn't. But they're going up against the Carolina Panthers, who gave up the most rushing fantasy football points last week. Can Jamaal Williams find the end zone? I think he does this week, and so I like Jamaal Williams here as my RB20. Moving on to my RB21, we have James Conner versus the New York Giants. Now, the Arizona Cardinals are not going to be blowing out the Giants like the Dallas Cowboys, but like we've been saying all offseason, the volume is there, and the volume was still there last week for James Conner. A lot for us to be considering when we put James Conner here, but it is a volume play, and I do like James Conner because you probably drafted him as a high-end RB. Moving on to our D tier, we have Raheem Mostert, who is going up against the New England Patriots. I think it's a sit this week for Raheem Mostert, especially if you have one of these top 21 guys, but maybe you are a little bit weak at running back. Raheem Mostert seems like a valuable option. It's going to be an okay game. They might get up early on the Patriots. Then all of a sudden it does become the Raheem Mostert show because there is no one currently behind Raheem Mostert on the depth chart. That scares us because Etienne is still recovering from his injury. We move on to Miles Sanders versus the New Orleans Saints. It is a pretty bad matchup, but again, this is going to be a volume play. We're looking at running backs here that have the potential to land in the end zone and get 10 to 15 touches, and that is Miles Sanders here. My next player is going to be Tyler Allgeier. As much as we love Bijan and we still have him high, Tyler Allgeier put up super solid fantasy football points last week, pretty much as the RB1. So I think both these guys can coexist, especially with the lack of passing attempts. I do like Tyler Allgeier here as they play Green Bay. We then move on to our next 2 guys, and I'm still putting these guys very similar. Same way we're putting the Detroit Lions guys super close. We have Breece Hall and Dalvin Cook. Well, Breece Hall looked like kind of his old self, like he didn't have quite the explosion, but still had explosion. Dalvin Cook still got more touches and got more receptions last week than Breece Hall did. I don't know if it's because Aaron Rodgers got hurt. They decided, hey, we got to see what's happening, ease Breece Hall in a little bit more slowly. Dalvin Cook's a little more healthier, recovered from his shoulder surgery. I think those are all things to consider. But yeah, I'm putting both these guys close by. So if you have to decide between both, I'll probably be leaning Breece Hall ever so slightly, but that's only because of the elite level upside that Breece Hall does possess. Dalvin Cook really had the volume last week. We then move on to my next 2 guys. We have Najee Harris and Brian Robinson. It's crazy that I have Najee Harris this low. Just feels like yesterday was a rookie. We're talking about him in that A tier. But Najee Harris, last week he put up 5.3 fantasy points, which just isn't going to get it done. It isn't going to get it done, but he's going up against the Cleveland Browns. And so you have to roll a guy out like Najee Harris. Absolute volume play. Same thing with Brian Robinson. We don't love the upside on either of these guys. I was all in on Antonio Gibson this offseason. I think that fumble sealed the deal for the next few weeks from week 1 that Brian Robinson will be getting majority of the touches in the Washington Commanders offense. So Brian Robinson versus Denver, okay matchup. Najee versus Cleveland, that's a pretty fair matchup. But both these guys, I just have them here. I can't push them higher. Don't like the upside on this week. We move on to now our E tier, and we have RB29. We got Isaiah Pacheco. What can I say? 9.4 fantasy points. It's still a lot more of a committee than people want to realize. The Chiefs, it's like they love to run anybody in a committee. So Isaiah Pacheco versus Jacksonville Jaguars, they might get up early and then they get to run the ball, but based on the offense with Travis Kelce coming back, I think they're going to definitely light it up. We then move to our next guy where I have Javonte Williams, and then I did not make a graphic, but I will have Samaje Perine here. Both these guys going up against the Washington Commanders offense. The Washington Commanders looked super interesting last week. I do have them kind of right there in the same tier as we continue to want to see Javonte Williams just get a little bit more healthy. If this is your first time on the channel, watch the video all the way through. Appreciate you for being here. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. We're continuing to build the best fantasy football community here on YouTube. So hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.